Hi, my name is Mitch Faras. I'm the CEO of Elligo. We crowdsource feedback and provide insights to users and companies using our app. I'm really excited to share with you our journey today. I mean, you're building something for a customer, and you need to reach that person. They need to look at it and know intuitively what it is, because if it's confusing, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So at the very beginning, when I first had the idea for the app, it was all in my head and I didn't even know quite what I wanted. I kind of knew, I was like, I needs to feel like Instagram. That's all I can tell you, but it can't be that. And so from that, it spawned this. Okay, you need to get clear on what you want, and it's a really hard thing to answer because you don't know what you want. You have an idea of what you want, but I'm not an artist. I'm not a graphics designer. I'm an engineer. I look at things just logically and I go, well, it needs to have X, Y, Z functions, but the actual user experience is a whole different ballgame. So that's pretty critical early on. I'd say that's one of the first things that anyone would need to flesh out when if you're building a product. That's probably the first thing you need to flesh out is the user experience, because it's really important and it's so critical for make or break. And that's one of the things working with Engenesis. In Genesis, we're able to turn my idea or the dot points that were in my head into an actual thing that I can look at and go, oh, that's exactly what I want. That whole prototype stage, there's a lot of behind the scenes. So, I mean, you're talking about lines and lines and lines of code, and every line means something, and every line means something else. And they all interlock, and I don't have a computer science background. So, for me, it's like, oh, this is in my head, let's just build this. But there's a million steps that you need to build to get there. And those million steps, if you build them and they're wrong, it's a very costly mistake to have to knock the steps down and rebuild them. So the prototype lets you essentially build the landings for the steps and go, okay, this is what this will look like, this is what this will look like, this is what this will look like. Is that what you want? Is that what you're imagining in your head? And probably the most important question and why you would do that is, will the user respond to the landings you set in place? And once you answer that question, yes, they will, or no, they won't. This is actually not what we'd envisioned, or you give it to someone else to look at and you get a fresh set of eyes on it and they go, why would you do this? Or how come you haven't done this? Then you can adjust the landings, and once you've got it right, you build the steps. That's probably the best way I can think about telling it, because you're literally talking about lines and lines and lines and lines of code, and once they're all built, that's time and money that you've spent, and if they're wrong, you're just paying more money and spending more time to correct them. Whereas if you get the framework right, you get the prototype right, you let people use the product in its initial stages, and it doesn't have to be flashy, it just needs to allude to what you're trying to achieve. And these people will say, this is how I feel about this, or I understand what you're trying to do, or I would like to see this. It might be something you haven't even thought of. Like the amount of back and forth between whether we should have one tap versus two taps. That's something you don't think of when you're planning out what it's going to look like. You don't think about that. And the colors of the icons and what the logo is going to be and all this stuff. And do you need a border in between the two posts or not? And when you click it, are you going to have a border? All that stuff needs to be fleshed out in the prototype phase. You get the framework together and then you start building on the framework. if you just build the app, you're going to have crashes. You're going to have it's just not going to work. And I know that from experience. It was mitigated a lot, but when we went from the prototype to the end design, we had those challenges. Even with the iteration, there were things that weren't communicated because you just can't foresee them, or you don't foresee them. You can't foresee thousands of little switches turning on and off and how they all affect one another. You just can't do it. And so that's one of the reasons why once you get the framework together, then you can iterate to each landing and build it as you go. And it's just such, from an engineering perspective, risk mitigation, it's massive. And that's exactly what the prototyping is. It's risk mitigation. It's iterating your development. It's just a smarter way to do things. You don't have to work harder. You work smarter. You save yourself time and money by putting in the initial, definitely. I know only a couple of people who have actually gone and developed an app. I don't think they're doing that anymore. I think they've come out with a product and they went through and built it straight away. I don't think that's what they're doing with their time anymore. We always knew going into this that there was a 99% chance that we weren't going to get anywhere, and it's just, you hear about it all the time. And Scott, my business partner, the data analyst, the computer scientist, was telling me, we have a 1% chance of making an app. And we knew that going into it. And I trust him. I said, okay, that's great odds for me. That's 1% more than what I'd hoped for, so we're going to do it. But, I just think if we went the other way and we went out to a bunch of companies once we had the idea, and it was very much a, what's it gonna cost, and we didn't have a lot of capital up front. We weren't willing to risk everything to do it. We wanted a very conservative approach, and we wanted risk mitigation. Two of us have an engineering background. That's how we think. It's just how we're wired. And even going through it and doing it, like the amount of challenges that are in your way, I just think if you don't iterate, you're just going to rack up this bill, and it's going to cost you twice as much to implement the changes, and you won't even get the finished product. And so from experience in that regard, we wouldn't be where we are today. If we'd gone through and built it, we would have had a large debt, because apps aren't cheap. They don't grow on trees. There's quite a lot of money that you need to spend to get the app developed. We wouldn't be where we are here today. We would have had to cut our losses, and we would have been looking at thousands upon thousands of dollars with nothing to show for it. I think so. Definitely at the start, the prototyping was something that we didn't anticipate, but it turned out to be really, really helpful. Because, like I said, we had the framework. We built the landings, and we could see where we were going, and then we built the stairs to the landings. And that iterative approach just made life so much easier than just going and diving in and waiting for that finished product, because it wouldn't have been what we were thinking. Yeah, well, it's definitely so. Engenesis have that framework that we stick to, and this started 2 years ago, and we went into it. And one of the biggest benefits that I found especially with working with Engenesis, is you've been here and done this before, and we haven't. And we had a lot of assumptions, and coming into this, we kind of assumed you start and you finish, and that's it. And that's not how it works. There's a lot of steps along the way. So using the framework and having it's kind of like we had someone who's been down this journey before to just keep us on the right path. It's like we kind of knew where we wanted to go, but we didn't have the path to get there. And the framework, the iteration, the testing, working with the team in the development, in what it's going to look like, even with the business, on the business side of things, validating the idea and all that kind of stuff, that was massive. It was make or break. Like, we wouldn't have the app on the App Store if we didn't have this model that we could follow and the system. You don't know that. As an entrepreneur, you're kind of going into everything a little bit blind if you haven't done it before. We hadn't done it before. So we had no experience to call upon. We had a bunch of assumptions. We knew in our heads what we were trying to do, and we knew where we wanted to be, and we had no idea what the path looked like to get there. That's what the Engenesis framework did for us. It was at each step, this is the question we need to answer. And this is the question we need to ask ourselves. So at each point, those questions were asked of us. How are we going to solve this? Who are we going to target for this? What will that look like? And then you move on to the next step. And at each point, you validate what you're doing, and you validate each step you're taking, so that you're not going to incur those mistakes and the costs of just racing into it. You're jumping from step 1 to step 4, missing 2 and 3, and then at step 4 you have to come back to step 1 to go to step 2. It's just time and money that you're wasting. And I think that probably more so than, I suppose, at each step there was things that we learnt, but it was the system that was created that we could follow was invaluable to us, because not many entrepreneurs have that luxury. You talk about the people who have made it. They didn't have the framework that we had, and they got there, and they're the 1%. The 99% that don't have the framework, they fail. And we knew those odds going in. So that 1% was enough for us to go, okay, let's do this. And we were lucky that we just happened to find a company to partner with who said, we can show you how to get there. And that's exactly what we did. And that's why we're here today. Definitely. So getting to the prototype was huge. That was a big mountain that we climbed, and we reached that. That was great. Once you move from the prototype to the final product, it's a big jump, because you can get to the prototype with, reasonably the money in your back pocket. You can get to your prototype. Getting to the final product it's big. It's a big challenge. And it takes a bit of capital, and it's something that we'd never done that before. We hadn't done that. We'd never experienced that before. So when you're looking at what it's going to take to get to the end, it's a massive, massive step, and we took our time, like, deciding whether or not it's like, is this something we actually want to do? But at the end of the day, this hadn't been done before. It was something we truly believed could change people's lives. And that's the reason why we'd only wanted to do this in the first place. It was called Help at the beginning for a reason. Like, early on, it was called Help, because we truly believed that it could be of service to people. And again, as we always did, when we were looking at what it would take to get to the final stage, we found ways that we could work with Engenesis, mitigate the risks that we were following, and we looked at the people we were partnering with. That was big for us in terms of getting the validation for ourselves. You can build your product all you want and work to make sure that people are going to use it, which we did, and we got that validation, and we spoke to people. But in terms of actually building the product, it's a huge step for you, and no one's going to walk that path but you. Being within Engenesis, that was critical for us, not to walk the path alone. And that was probably a major, if not one of the most important reasons why we went ahead. because we could see how we were going to get to the end. And we had the support of people who have done it before. So if I went to another company and they said, this is what it's going to cost, do you want to go yes or no? We wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't be here. Because I would have said no. It wasn't something I was willing to do at the time. You're talking about a 1% chance to build this and finish it. And I mean, it's not very good odds, right? But we still had that 1% chance, but we could see the steps we needed to take to get to the end. And that was massive for us for pulling the trigger. And it was still we still had to put in, and we split it between, I got 2 founders with me. We all went in equal partners into that. We partnered with Engenesis. So Engenesis kind of said, look, we're willing to support you, we believe in you, and we want to parallel with you on the journey. So we're all in this together and we're all going to see it through. And that's huge when you've never done this before. Being able to talk to someone who's like, I know the steps to take to get to the end. I've done this a number of different ways in the past. That was big, because Engenesis have validated themselves and they've walked the path that we're about to go down. That's huge. Yeah. One of the things when we were making the decision to go ahead with building the final product, it was actually yourself, and Engenesis, that mentioned that there were these government grants that supported startup companies. And there was a Jobs for New South Wales grant that offered, it was $25,000 matched funding for your new business, your product, service, whatever you were building. And essentially it was, what we had to do, it was a huge Q&A that we had to fill out. It was an application. We're going up against however many other entrepreneurs and startups that were going for this grant application. So we put the application together, and what were some of the questions? Some of the questions were, how would your product benefit people in rural New South Wales? And so it's an effort in itself to get through. You have to really think about this. We had a lot of the answers ready because we'd done a lot of the validation already. So we knew how to answer the questions. But the hope of getting that $25,000 grant, just like starting the app to begin with, that's a massive long shot, so let's do it. Let's just assume we're going to get it. And so we lodged the application. It was funny, we changed our email halfway through, so they were trying to get to us for about 2 or 3 months, telling us that we'd been accepted before we got back to them. They were about to pull the plug. We got the grant. So we got it, and I kind of was like, awesome, we got that. I called Scotty, and we got the grant. He's like, nice. Called Davo, we got the grant, nice. It's like, cool. And then I was driving home, and I was on the phone to my girlfriend, and I said, hey, we just got $25,000 from the government, and all we had to do was type some words on the page. Now they were good words, but that for us, when I was explaining it to someone else, I was like, hang on a minute, the New South Wales government just validated my idea. I mean, I'll validate my idea every day of the week. No one can tell me it's no good. But the New South Wales government just said, yeah, you're onto something. Like, that was crazy. And it wasn't until that phone call, it was like the 4th phone call, that I was like, oh my God, like, we just got $25,000 from the government. Like, we're just 3 kids from a public school who, were told that we wouldn't amount to much. I got told I'd never be an engineer by my maths teacher. And here I am, the government's paying me for an idea I had just driving home one day, which was crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And so I went into the office to do the final validation. They wanted to look at the product. which they didn't tell us until the very end. And I was a bit nervous going in there. I was like, but my application was good. So we went in and, I sat down, talked to the guy about, house hunting and this and that. And he was a really nice guy. He kind of looked like a villain in a movie. And he had a shaved head and these glasses, and he looked really menacing. But he was a lovely guy, and I opened up the app, gave one demonstration, and he signed the form. He said, you'll get paid on Thursday. And it was Tuesday. And that was it. So that was huge for us, just having that opportunity. So when I had the idea, I was like, this is a cool idea. And I told it to my two closest mates, and we got together, and we've been getting together every weekend since I had the idea. It started this Sunday breakfast thing, and I think we've probably missed, about 10 in the last 2.5 years. We get together every weekend. And we were fleshing out the idea, and we didn't think it'd go anywhere. We're like, this is a great pipe dream that's, we can tell our kids that we had this idea and we would have been, millionaires if we'd done it, but whatever. We never really expected it to go anywhere. We're confident that we can do anything. We've always had that optimism and that confidence, but I didn't actually think it would go anywhere. I have a lot of these great ideas, and I think that's a great idea, and I don't expect it to eventuate to anything. We got to a point where we'd fleshed out the idea enough that we couldn't do any more without actually trying something. So we thought, we're not going to lose anything by calling some companies and just seeing what it would cost. Hey, if it's 10 grand, we could probably do it. It's not 10 grand. Plus, the companies won't even build it for you. Like, we got rejected by 9 out of 10 companies. They were just saying, no, we don't want a stake. It's going to cost this. And we said, we can't afford that. No, we're not interested in the idea. It was really when we got onto you at Engenesis that you said, hang on a minute, I see some merit in this. Let's set up a meeting. And that started everything. That started, all right, let's see if we can get to the prototype. Which we did, and like I said, it's kind of the money out of your back pocket, but it's an investment that you should spend. That's the first step for you validating your idea at all. So you put that small investment up front, and you get the landings, and you see what it's going to look like. Then you take the next jump. You look at the Genesis framework, and you say to yourself, okay, they've walked this path before, we can do this. So then you jump into that, and there's challenges along the way, of course, but again, it was always do what you need to do every day. You had one eye on the horizon that you've never seen before, but you're just hoping you're going to get there. And it didn't seem real that, we're going to be here and this is what it's going to look like. Then you get the app, you get this grant, and people are buying into it. And you just think, wow, I did this, and I got here. I never expected to do this. I never expected to be here. I never expected to have an app on the App Store. There's a lot of challenges that get thrown on you, but unless you make the call and you sit down and you actually and that was all it took. One phone call, that changed everything. One phone call, let's set up a meeting. We came in and sat in here for like an hour, and we said, all right, let's see what we can do.